communication that you're having with a person that you're just thrown together with because of the circumstances of the work that you do.
Deborah, what are your thoughts listening to this and reflecting on the earlier question, which was really about whether it's compatible, whether sex work is compatible with feminism?
I'll get to that in a moment. The young lady who didn't get to finish her question, I agree. Margaret Thatcher, by comparison, did have a privileged life.
She was incredibly educated.
It would have been quite a different question had she been black or homosexual in that age. So, yes, she did leave privilege of a sort, even a shopkeeper's daughter. I think it is a woman's right to choose. I think there's a really big issue that I always think about in the sex industry, and that is demand and supply. All of the focus tends to be on the sex worker, mostly, well, many women. Of course, there are men who also work in the sex worker industry. I think it is a right to choose, and I think that it is compatible with feminism if you have that right to choose. And many women don't in non-Western countries.
So I was going to hear from the last panellist who hasn't spoken on this subject, just to hear your thoughts.
It's interesting, you know, whenever we occasionally we'll publish a piece on Mamma Mia where a prostitute, a sex worker, will write her story and we'll talk about her choice to be a sex worker. And commenters and readers will be very, very passionate about the fact that this isn't the full story of sex work and that there's the full spectrum from sex slavery and sex trafficking to, as you say, the sex workers that work with disabled people. I think that there's an absolute full spectrum, and I think that I'm sad that people said that you couldn't be a feminist. I think that that's really, really unhelpful.
Well, in fact, you were heavily attacked by feminists and others, weren't you?
Well, I mean, I do think there's probably a rather different feminist landscape in the UK, a very sort of second wave, blue stocking-y, trans denial, sex worker denial, and incredibly privileged elite writing for the papers. And I won't deny that there is quite a lot of privilege that came with my life as well. You know, in spite of having the disadvantage of being a migrant and very restricted in the work that I do. I'm white, I usually pass for English, and of course I'm extremely well educated. But really, it's the workers within the industry, when you talk to them, who are best placed to understand and undertake the outreach to the less privileged members of the industry, because they have that first-hand experience, because they know what the labour issues are, because they know how the industry works.
But let's be clear that no little girl grows up wanting to be a sex worker. Thank
I know
heavens.
ones who did. I mean, that's a pat line, but I actually know ones who did.
So
I'm sorry that it bothers you. I'm sorry that your feelings make you think that you can judge somebody else's choices.
I would be disturbed if my daughter wanted to grow up to be a sex worker.
But you would still support her because you love her unconditionally.
Yeah, but I think that this idea of that every woman does it freely out of choice, in some ways you say you had no choice.
Absolutely, but we all have no choice in some ways. Could you have been a physicist?
No.
Could you have been an astronaut? So you don't really have free choice. It could still happen.
I think on that rhetorical point, I would say this. You're watching Q&A. You may have noticed that all of our panellists are women. The next question comes from Palwisha Yusuf.
This is a question for all the panel members. Tunisian activist Amina Tyler's topless protest last month has brought diversity in feminism and feminist action into sharp focus. In response to her incarceration, Ukrainian group Femin launched a topless jihad day. Muslim women globally responded online in defence of the right to wear hijab and in protest against what many saw as white colonial feminism's attempt at saving brown women from brown men. Is Femin's action an attempt at solidarity, or is it symptomatic of a more widely held belief in Western liberal feminism that Islam and feminism are in fact incompatible and that feminist thought and action within an Islamic context cannot occur?
Germaine Greer, let's start with you.
Well, historically, that if such a view was held, it would be wrong, because there have been Islamic feminists who have endured prison and beating and rape, but who also wished to protest against the westernization of their society and, in fact, the growth in pornography and other activities that they considered to be socially undesirable. And the founding of Islamic feminism is connected with these heroic women who defended the Islamic lifestyle against the encroachments of the West. So that there is Islamic feminism. The next question is, can we live with it? But what follows on from that is the melancholy realization that Western feminism has been discredited in the East, in the Islamic world, largely because of people like me, because I happen to be against censorship and in favour of sexual liberation. So I'm going to be the first to be strung up by the thumbs. Now, this is a struggle that is real, and right now it looks as if we're losing it, because the most fundamentalist Islamic sects, like the Salafists, are gaining power in the areas of the Arab protests. And it looks very much from today's events, for example, in Cairo, where a Coptic funeral was stoned and there were riots in the streets. It looks very much as if we are going to find a hardening of the Islamist attitude and a terrible confrontation that we have no way of dealing with.
And yet you get this sort of crossover, don't you? Because there is that famous Egyptian woman, Alia El-Mahdi, who went further, I think, than the woman who was photographed bare-chested with the note scrawled across her body saying, my body is my own, more or less. The other woman, the Egyptian woman, posed absolutely naked as a sort of complete affront to her own government.
Well, I'm afraid that all of those young women who take that path are in tremendous danger because the tide of history is running against them at this time. Now, what we can do about it, I don't know. I mean, we like to concentrate on other people's anti-feminist behaviour while ignoring our own. For example, you know, we have genital mutilation in our society, but we never talk about it. One of the commonest operations on newborns is reduction of the size of the clitoris. Nobody objects to this because we think it's somehow medical or something. We've got some nonsense to cover it. Instead, we get terribly interested in the pudenda of other people who haven't asked for us to interfere. It seems to me that we've got to purify our own stables before we start trying to tell other people how to live their lives, because at the moment what's happening is complete resistance.
Germaine, let's just for the audience, we've actually got a picture of we've got the picture posted by the young Tunisian woman. Now, this was obviously designed as a personal protest against Islamism, and you're saying, obviously, this has put her in danger, but this protest now links up to this feminine movement in Europe, and I know you've been rather sceptical of them as well, but briefly, because I want to hear from the other panelists.
Topless is easy. You wanted to upset people, go bottomless. No? I mean, and be old. Don't be. Join the movement.
Now, come on, when you were young, you did go bottomless, we know that.
Yes, I know, but we've got 19-year-old girls with very pretty breasts who are getting a chance to show them off, and it's really funny when you actually look at the videos, you realise that they're in a street with nobody in it except 3 photographers, and that's really what it's all about.
OK, that's the feminine movement, but of course that particular image there, that was done in Tunisia,
well,
and I understand she'd been put in a psychiatric institution by her family to protect her from being murdered by the government.
Well, it's probably better than having to go and live in the Ukraine. What do you reckon?
I'm not too sure about that. Janet Albrechston, what do you think about this proto-feminist movement?
Well, I think she's entitled to take her clothes off. I think she's entitled to take her bottoms off. I think she's entitled to walk naked down the streets of Tunisia. And sure, she's putting herself in danger, but that's the entire point of what she's trying to do, isn't it? She's saying to people... And isn't this what feminists were doing in the 70s when they were burning their bras and saying, well, we're not going to conform to what it is that we're meant to be doing, to, you know, squeezing our breasts into bras? You've talked about that, I'm sure, Germaine, right? This is what they're doing, except there's a big difference between what Western feminists did in the 70s and saying, well, I have a right not to shave under my armpits if I don't want to. These women are saying, I have a right not to be stoned to death if I take my top off. You know, there's conformity and there's conformity, and I would have thought that what's crying out to happen is that there ought to be Western feminists going to the defence of women like this, and I think sadly there's been silence from far too many feminists on these issues. We talk about it occasionally. There's a couple of pieces here and there, but there's no groundswell movement within the Western feminist sisterhood, if you like, supporting these women. OK,
we've got time for one last question. Does everyone have a chance to respond to this last question? And it is somehow does reflect what you were just saying, partly. It's from Olivia Morris.
As a 16-year-old living in a developed country, defining myself as a feminist has been a negative and disempowering experience, as the F word seems to be regarded as a